Hi, this is the 4Heroes podcast. Each episode is meant to offer hope and help to our public safety community, as well as those outside of public safety who want to see, serve, and support these heroes. This week, Chaplain Frank Mercer continues his study of the book of Exodus at the 4Heroes Huddle. It was a noisy day at the local coffee shop, but this message is incredibly encouraging. If you've ever felt like a nobody, if you've ever felt insecure about who you are or what you're meant to do, Moses' journey is a reminder that God is looking for ordinary people who are willing to put their trust in an extraordinary God.
I'm glad you guys are here. We're going to pick up where we left off. God has done something really unusual. He has appeared to Moses in a burning bush. He announces that he has heard the cries of his people. He has remembered the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he has come down, which gives Moses a great sense of relief. Go, God. Do your thing, God. I'm right behind you, God. And God says, no. You're not right behind me. You're right in front of me because I'm sending you. Moses can think of so many reasons why that's not a good idea, you know. I mean, I'll start with things he didn't even name. I'm so old. I'm 80 years old. I've got a beard and a staff and a passing resemblance to Charlton Heston, but I'm old. I mean, you understand why I'm living in Midian, right? Because I used to live in Egypt and it didn't go so well. I'm not very popular. You need to keep on moving, God. There's nothing to see here. That's not what Moses says, though. He says this in verse 11 of Exodus 3. He says, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" Who am I? I'm a nobody. I have nothing to offer anybody. And I love that God doesn't say, "Hey, Mo, don't be so hard on yourself. It's okay, buddy. Buck up. You're special. You're a snowflake. Of course you're somebody." God doesn't say that. What God says is, "I'll be with you." As if to say, I'm well aware of your nobody characteristics. That's why I'm coming. I'll be with you. I know what you aren't. And I know who I am. God's not looking for anybody extraordinary. He's looking for an ordinary person who is willing to place all of his trust, all of his hope, all of his faith, all of his confidence, everything that he is and everything that he has in the hands of an extraordinary God. That's what God was looking for that day. That's what God's looking for now. Moses says, well, suppose I do go. And I say, the God of your fathers has sent me. And they ask, what is his name? What should I tell them? We haven't been properly introduced. I don't even know your name. And God, for the first time in the Old Testament, gives his name. He says, I am who I am. Tell them, I am has sent you. And Moses said, what if they don't believe me? And God says, it's not your job to be persuasive. It's not your job to convince them. I mean, that's not what he actually says, but it's what he means. He says, what's in your hand, Moses? That staff that we were talking about before? One just like Charlton Heston had. What, this? My sheep stick? I'm sure that Moses, who was a city boy for 40 years, the first time he saw a staff, thought it was a sheep stick. My sheep stick? That's what I used to poke the sheep who were slow to move, or grab the sheep who's fallen into a hole. When sheep don't do the right thing, I have to use my sheep stick. Or as Jethro calls it more formally, my staff. Throw it on the ground, Moses. That's what God says to Moses. Throw it on the ground. Which Moses did and then wished he hadn't. Because the straight stick turned into a crooked stick, turned into a snake. What did Moses do when it turned into a snake? Well, Exodus chapter 4, verse 3 says he ran away from it. He did what any right-minded person would do. He ran away from it. I don't like snakes. Me and Indiana Jones and Moses and Lieutenant Duluth all have that in common. Don't like snakes. God says, pick it up by the tail. And Moses says, oh, why don't you pick it up? You turned it into a snake. It's not really what Moses said, but I expected you to have to swallow hard and think about it for a second before he reached down and picked it up by the tail. But when he did, it turned back into a sheep stick. And Moses is still staring at the sheep stick that had been a snake when God says, put your hand inside your cloak. And Moses takes his hand and he sticks it inside his cloak, and God says, take it back out again. And when Moses took his hand back out again, it was leprous, covered in leprosy, which is incurable. It's a death warrant. I mean, he's as good as dead. Literally a dead man walking. And what's more than that is that he's not going to be able to have any contact with his wife, with his children. He's going to be ostracized, isolated. And all of that is spinning in his head before he can say anything. God says, put your hand back in your cloak, which Moses does. Take it out again, which Moses did. And this time his hand is clean, whole, well again. God's saying, I have power over nature, but it's not just parlor tricks like Egyptian magicians can perform of snakes and sticks. It's that I have the power over life and death. I can give life, I can take it away, I can give it again. And this time Moses says, I don't talk so good. I'm slow of speech and tongue, and some Bible scholars think that Moses may have stammered or stuttered. You might as well say, I'm too fat, or I'm too skinny, or I'm too short, or I'm too tall. Because God says, who gave you your mouth to begin with? I will help you speak. Finally, in verse 13 of Exodus 4, Moses says, please send someone else, which was what he wanted to say all along. All of this just to go to that. Please send someone else. And God says, I'll send your brother, Aaron, who Moses hadn't seen in 40 years or more. Moses thinks he understands the situation. He's going to have to go back to Egypt. He and his brother Aaron are somehow going to persuade Pharaoh by the power of God to set the Hebrew slaves free. You know, Moses can only understand so much. He has no idea that he's going to have to face Pharaoh, who Pharaoh is going to have such a hard heart. He has no idea about the 10 plagues. I mean, he's seen miracles of God, but he has no idea what God is going to do. No idea about crossing the Red Sea, no idea about the 10 Commandments or 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. He has no idea that he himself is not going to cross into the promised land. He's on a need-to-know basis. And Moses, you just don't need to know all that. Much like we are, you know. You don't know how your story is going to go. You can be fully and faithfully obedient to God, and there are going to be twists and turns and ups and downs, surprises that you never would have seen coming, and maybe even surprises that would have caused you not to sign up for this journey if you'd known. What he needed to know was all spelled out. He needed to know that he was inadequate. He certainly was, as are any of us. You know, Moses seems to be very clear on that. He gives God a pretty good laundry list of reasons why he's inadequate to do this, and God gives him the one reason why it doesn't matter. That is that God, the one who would be with him, was more than enough. I am that I am. I am the only self-existent, infinite, omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient being in the entire universe. And the great I am, as it turns out, is accustomed to working with great I am nots, like you and me. Those of us who fall short. I'm going to quote Rick Warren from Purpose Driven Life in saying that Abraham was old, Jacob was insecure. Sorry, Jacob. Rahab was immoral. David was also immoral. Elijah was suicidal. Jeremiah was depressed. Jonah was reluctant. John the Baptist was eccentric, to say the least. Peter was impulsive. Martha worried all the time. And Thomas had his share of doubts. We are am-nots, at least compared to him. We got too much of one thing and not enough of something else. That's me. I mean, that's my story. I could give you a long laundry list of why I should not be doing this. But at the end of my laundry list, God says, I am. I am fully aware of your long laundry list of reasons you should not do this, but also, for all your inadequacies, I am more than adequate. For all of your insufficiencies, I'm more than sufficient. God doesn't even need Moses to come along. His invitation to Moses is, man, that's grace. I've come down. I've heard the cries of my people. I'm going to set them free. And Moses, why don't you come with? It's grace. God doesn't need you or me either. He chooses to call us, to invite us, to join him in what he is doing. Do you remember a guy who played for the Chicago Bulls, came on in the late 80s as a draft pick, stuck around, won some championships? He was part of a documentary that was on Netflix back in 2020 called The Last Dance. You remember this guy? Did you say Michael Jordan? I think Michael Jordan's part of the story, but I was thinking of Stacey King. Stacey King was drafted by the Bulls the year after Michael. You said Jordan? Is that how you pronounce his last name?
Is that like the tennis shoes?
Stacey King played on 3 of those championship teams. He averaged 6.6 points a game. March 28th, 1990, Michael Jordan explodes for 69 points against the Cleveland Cavaliers. In that game, Stacey King came off the bench and shot 1 free throw. He scored 1 point. When Stacey King was interviewed in the locker room after the game, you know, what will you remember most about tonight? He looked at the interviewer, looked him in the eye, and said, tonight's one for the history books. It'll always be remembered as the night that MJ and I combined for 70. I love that. I absolutely love it. And that's what this is like. You know, I bring so little to the table. Virtually nothing. Okay, it's not even virtually. It's nothing. Just me. Inadequate, insufficient me. And still the all-sufficient one, God, invites me to come to the table. You know, I think about this event in the ministry of Jesus when there are 5,000 people, more than that really, 5,000 men plus women and children, and they've come to hear Jesus teach. There's nothing to eat. There's not a McDonald's or a Chick-fil-A or a Bojangles or even a Cracker Barrel anywhere to be found.
Not even a Waffle House?
Not even a Waffle House. Can you believe that? So clearly not in Georgia.
I guess not.
Nothing to eat. Andrew found this little boy. He's got his lunch that his mom made for him. There's some fish sticks and biscuits in there. This little boy's willing to give it all away. He just gives it away, just all that he has. It's who he gives it to, though. He gives it to Jesus. And Jesus has a way of taking little and making it much. He still has a way of taking little and making it much. The all-sufficient one wants to take your life in his hands, like a tool in the hand of the carpenter from Nazareth. Build his house, build his kingdom, one day at a time, one life at a time. Takes my breath away. Absolutely takes my breath away. And even Moses is left speechless. So if Moses is speechless, I guess I'm now speechless too. That's all I got to say about that. Let me pray for you.
Thank you for listening to the 4Heroes podcast. We have more episodes on the way, some from the 4Heroes Huddle and others that are conversations with our staff, local first responders, and other public safety professionals. Don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss a single one. As you continue with your day, our prayer is that you would place your life in God's hands, that you would say yes to Him and join the God of the universe as He accomplishes amazing things.